Laudetur Jesus Christus, Vatican and World News.
Today, Thursday, February 18th, is the feast of Blessed John of Fiesole, known as Fra Angelico, Dominican friar and patron of artists. And these are today's headlines. At least 35 people have been killed in Chad due to conflicts between herders and farmers. The UN Secretary General is denouncing inequality in access to the COVID-19 vaccine. And local churches will be gathering together on Friday to pray for victims and survivors of abuse. In the Vatican, I'm Christopher Wells. Our top story today, clashes between nomadic herders and sedentary farmers in southern Chad, an area plagued by heavy conflicts between these two communities, have resulted in the deaths recently of at least 35 people. Father Benedict Mayaki has the story.
At least 35 people were killed in clashes between farmers and semi-nomadic herders in southeastern Chad, a region where friction between the two groups is common. Provincial Secretary General Mara Mad told news sources on Wednesday that the fighting occurred in the Salamat province, where farmers were attacked when they encountered an illegal roadblock. One of them was killed and two were injured. The farmers, blaming the cattle herders for the roadblock, launched an attack on them, prompting authorities to send in troops to restore order. This retaliatory attack led to the deaths of 35 people. In Chad, the semi-nomadic herders and the sedentary farmers have a long-running troubled history. Many of the conflicts between the two groups are due to the region's lush vegetation produced by the relatively mild climate for the Sahel. For centuries, the region has attracted migratory cattle herders from arid areas for seasonal grazing, many of them Arabs. Episodes of violence often erupt following the destruction of crops by livestock. Chadian President Idriss Déby Itno said in a speech in December that he was distressed and dismayed by the deadly clashes between the two groups. In November 2020, at least 22 people were killed in farmer-herder clashes in Kabia, which is also located in Chad's southern region, while nearly 50 were killed in separate ethnic clashes across Chad between December and January. I'm Father Benedict Mayaki.
Elsewhere, some 450 migrants, coming mainly from Haiti and from African nations, were forced to enter Peruvian territory last Tuesday after spending 2 days at the integration bridge that joins Peru and Brazil. Hours later, they were sent into Brazilian territory. As a result of the confrontation with Peruvian police authorities, 14 migrants had to be treated at the local Iñapari health post. Francesca Merlo has more.
In recent days, the border crossing between the state of Acre in Brazil and Madre de Dios in Peru has become a scenario of social and humanitarian emergency following the recent wave of migrants of different nationalities who have been blocked due to the border closure because of the health emergency. As reported in an article published by the Amazonian Center of Anthropology and Practical Application and by Radio Madre de Dios, the crisis at the border between Peru and Brazil reached its highest peak on Tuesday morning after more than 400 citizens, mostly Haitians living in Brazil, forcibly entered national territory. The article explains that the Peruvian police and military contingent located at the integration bridge in the Madre de Dios region was not enough to contain the mob of people who, in their desperation due to the economic and social crisis in Brazil, seek to cross Peru to migrate to other countries in the continent. According to statements collected, one of the main destinations would be Mexico, but also Panama, and even the return of some to their country of origin, Haiti, after more than a decade since a tragic earthquake that caused the massive migration of Haitians to Brazil. The article further describes that tension grew in response to the forced entry of the migrants. The Peruvian National Police and the army made use of tear gas bombs despite the presence of dozens of children, babies and pregnant women, reads a statement. It also adds that the confrontations were captured minute by minute through the live transmissions of Radio Madre de Dios, and the images also show how several moments of violence and tension are generated and how the agents coordinate the placement of a truck to prevent the entry of migrants. Finally, the regional governor of Madre de Dios, Luis Hildago Kimura, made it known that he is urgently requesting the national government to declare a state of emergency in the entire Madre de Dios region. I'm Francesca Merlo.
Elsewhere, the United Nations and its partners working to achieve equitable distribution of COVID-19 vaccines have appealed to the UN Security Council to ensure people caught in conflict have access to this life-saving treatment. Addressing a high-level virtual Security Council meeting on Wednesday, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres described the goal of providing vaccines to all as the biggest moral test before the global community. While stressing that everyone, everywhere must be included, he sharply criticized a wildly uneven and unfair distribution of vaccines between the rich North and the poor global South. Here is an excerpt from the address of the Secretary-General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres.
Defeating COVID-19, now that we have begun to have the scientific capacity to do so, is more important than ever. The rollout of COVID-19 vaccines is generating hope. But at this critical moment, vaccine equity is the biggest moral test before the global community. We must ensure that everybody, everywhere, can be vaccinated as soon as possible. Yet progress on vaccinations has been widely uneven and unfair. Just 10 countries have administered 75% of all COVID-19 vaccines. Meanwhile, more than 130 countries had not received a single dose. And those affected by conflict and insecurity are at particular risk of being left behind. When pandemic strikes, we are only safe if everyone is safe. If the virus is allowed to spread like wildfire in the global south or parts of it, it will mutate again and again. This can prolong the pandemic significantly, enabling the virus to come back to plague the global north. We have come together to create the COVAX facility, the one global tool to procure and deliver vaccines for low and middle income countries. COVAX requires to be fully funded, but we must do even more. Our efforts need to be comprehensive and well coordinated everywhere. The world urgently needs a global vaccination plan to bring together all those with required power, scientific expertise, and production and financial capacities. Together, we can ensure sufficient supply, fair distribution, and vaccine confidence. And we can defeat this disease. We can get our economies running again. I am convinced it's possible. Let's make it happen together, and I thank you.
And that was UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres. Pope Francis met today with the Apostolic Nuncio to Croatia. The nation has endured serious trials over the past year due to a pair of damaging earthquakes in the midst of the pandemic. Ahead of his meeting with the Holy Father, Archbishop Giorgio Lingua spoke with Vatican Radio to describe the pain endured in the Balkan nation. Devin Watkins tells us more.
Pope Francis met Thursday morning with Archbishop Giorgio Lingua, the Apostolic Nuncio to Croatia, in a private audience in the Vatican. Speaking to Vatican Radio's Alessandro Di Bussolo ahead of their encounter, the Archbishop reviewed the situation in the Balkan nation and expressed the Croatian people's steadfastness in the faith.
Porto al Papa una Croazia viva e provata.
I am presenting the Pope with a Croatia both very much alive and in pain. It has been tested by the tragedy of 2 earthquakes over the past year, one in Zagreb last March and the other in Petrinja in December. At least 8 people died in the quakes, all but one in Petrinja, and thousands of buildings were heavily damaged. Archbishop Lingua lamented the timing of the quakes, which took place as the country was entering its first COVID-19 lockdown and in the midst of its second. These 2 tragedies added to the damage already inflicted by the coronavirus pandemic, he said, which has severely crippled the tourism industry. Despite these trials, said the nuncio, Croatians are a proud people who have a well-organized and living church. Archbishop Lingua said certain tinges of clericalism, however, are evident in the local church. But, he added, Croatian Catholics foster a strong devotion to Our Lady and care deeply for the Pope and the Church of Rome. Another issue facing Croatian society, admitted the Italian Archbishop, is that of lying along the so-called Balkan route taken by numerous migrants seeking to enter Europe.
Ragazzi, giovani e adulti, anche in alcuni casi dei bambini.
Young people and adults, in some cases minors, he said, are forced to endure harsh winters in deplorable conditions. Yet now is not the time to point fingers, he added, but rather the time to seek solutions. Archbishop Lingua said migrants along the Balkan route risk being doubly let down. They risk despair, he said, perhaps because they left their home country naively, but with great hope.
Se non c'è un minimo di speranza in un futuro migliore,
if there is not even the slightest hope of a better future, said the Apostolic Nuncio, then disappointment could have serious negative consequences. I'm Devin Watkins.
Tomorrow, on the first Friday of Lent 2021, dozens of local churches will gather together in prayer for victims and survivors of abuse, for their families, and for their communities. In late 2016, Pope Francis wrote to bishops' conferences around the world, asking they choose an appropriate moment during the liturgical year to observe an annual National Day of Prayer for victims and survivors of abuse with the community of faithful. Over the past 4 years, many bishops' conferences and individual dioceses have taken steps to enact the proposal. Working hand in hand with the Pope on this issue is the Pontifical Commission for the Protection of Minors. Its mandate is to work closely with survivors in the development of safeguarding policies and practices, and to promote spiritual and pastoral care and healing. The Commission highlights that prayer is an important part of the healing process, and public prayer is a central way of raising consciousness in the Church. Dr. Miriam Williams, a Dutch professor of canon law at the University of Erfurt, and a member of the Pontifical Commission for the Protection of Minors, spoke with Vatican Radio about the work undertaken by the Church in recent years to ensure the safety of all and to protect the dignity of all persons.
The year 2001 marks the point where the leadership of the Roman Catholic Church began to give expression to an increased awareness that the subject of minors really needed a different approach. It marked a change in attitude and perspective, not the protection of the reputation of the Church, but the well-being and protection of minors must be the paramount interest. The Church really has to be a safe place for all together. So the dignity of the person does not allow them to be compromised. Looking back over the past 20 years, we can see that it has not only been a learning process, but indeed it has been an ongoing learning process for all concerned. This requires careful reflections and thus an exchange of expertise and thoughts. The Pontifical Commission has a study group entitled Safeguarding Guidelines and Norms, and after listening to conversations with different dicasteries of the Holy See, the 2019 February conference that Pope Francis convoked, and reports arising from different countries, the working group proposed, together with another group on education and information, to convoke a seminar on balancing confidentiality, transparency, and accountability. So it's about an appropriate balancing of these aspects, and that with regard to victims, their relatives, the accused, the specific community in which the abuse occurred, and the wider community, both ecclesial and secular. The key element of finding that balance is to be found in the protection and promotion of the dignity of every human person.
That was Dr. Miriam Williams, a member of the Pontifical Commission for the Protection of Minors. And that brings us to the end of this edition of Vatican and World News. For more on these and the stories, you can visit our web portal at www.vaticannews.va. Many thanks to our producers in studio. In the Vatican, I'm Christopher Wells.